Hello everybody and welcome to a slightly unusual video, but I had a subscriber ask me about Buckeye Battles. I went to Buckeye Battles this last weekend, which was a ninth age tournament here in Ohio. It was a huge tournament, about 100 people, so incredible turnout, and it was a absolute blast, a lot of fun. One Spittin came up for it. We had James in from Chai Hammer, Tuna Sandwich Fi and his brother were up. It was just a party all over the place. So a lot of great people all throughout the event, and I got to play five pretty fun games. So I thought, I didn't really take pictures over all of it. This was my first tournament with Ninth Age, so I didn't have a level of confidence to where I could both keep my mind aware of the rules and the complexities of the scenario and what was going on in the battlefield and take pictures. I'm sorry, but I'm in the end a limited human being. So I thought instead I'd just kind of talk through the various games I had and what I thought of them and what I thought of what I brought to the table and that kind of thing. So there we go. Let's get into it. So first off, what did I take? Well, I took Undying Legions, or Undying Dynasties, sorry. Too many different similar names out there. I took what used to be in an old world known as Tomb Kings. And I hemmed and hawed over this list for a while. Because there's a lot of elements to the Undying Dynasties that I really find unappealing. Specifically, and this is going to sound funny, but I don't really like skeletons that much. Just like blocks of skeletons. I find them to be rather boring. I know that's ironic given that army, but it's the other elements of the army that have always attracted me. That is to say, things like chariots and the Shabti and the Sphinxes and the Snake Surfers and all those kinds of things. And yes, I know Snake Surfers have skeletons on top, but they've also got a giant snake underneath them. So I really went back and forth on what I was going to take for the list. And what I came to eventually was this. So your Tomb Architect, if he's your general, turns a single unit of Shabti of up to 6 core. The problem is making him your general, because he can't easily be your general, given the rules of who is your general. So I had to get rid of any other dangerous character because they would all basically have to be the general. So instead, what we've got is a level 2 wizard, the Death Cult Acolyte. Bumped him up to level 2, gave him a Dispel Scroll, put him on a pony, that's it. He had no protections, no nothing. Other than the 6-up regen, he gives himself by virtue of existing as the Hierophant and being a necessity to exist. And then my actual general was a Tomb Architect on Amut, which is the names for the snakes. So he was on a snake, big giant snake. The advantage here is that it took my 2-wound hero level general and did give him 3 wounds. So it was a nice little, boost. It also gave him a significant amount of mobility, as because he's the general and he's going to be bunkered in a unit of snakes, he's always going to have, the ability to march around himself. So, that snake unit can move 14 inches, which is, that's not insignificant. That's not an insignificant amount of mobility in this army. So he could kind of be wherever he needed to. And I took another Tomb Architect on an undead pony, again, just bunkered into the same unit of cav archers that the caster was in. And their job was just to ride around behind the line and give out buffs and stuff. The Tomb Architects both had Master Masons, so their range for their little regen granting ability, they can both grant like a 5-up regen at the start of every turn to a single unit of undead constructs, which a great majority of my army is. So I could kind of use that to lever combats where I needed to without having to worry about casting things. So my core is outlined in yellow, 6 Shabti with halberds, full command, and the war banner. Those are sort of my nutcrackers. Those guys come in with, 3 attacks each and 2 ranks at strength 6. The war banner was just there because I knew they were going to often operate independently, and often 1 point of combat res can prevent me from bleeding wounds. And this army didn't have a lot in the way of ranks, as you can tell. Like, almost nothing in here brought ranks to bear, so, being able to not lose combat just on static combat res was often a concern. Was it necessary? Probably not, but I like it, so there you go. The rest of core was just filled out with junk. 2 units of skeleton cav, one being a bunker unit, the other being a scouting unit that just, got around and harassed things. Shot up enemy chaff and war machines and stuff like that. And then 3 chariots also acting as chaff. 3 chariots are amazingly good chaff. They're fairly mobile. They can be way out on the flank, but they can get around. They're scary because of those impact hits. So they, 3d6, even though it's only strength 4, but 3d6 strength 4 impact hits are often very frightening to other enemy chaff. It's going to clear out most any kind of enemy chaff pretty fast. 2 battle sphinxes with breath weapons. The breath weapon to me is just automatic. Like, you've got to have it. That is way too important to have that Sphinx be able to turn unnecessary combat when the other things go bad. 5 Tomb Cataphracts, which is the Snake Surfers, and then finally 8 Shabti with paired weapons and the movement banner. So moving them up to move 7. So a lot of my army was move 6 or 7, so it was fairly fast. Could get across the board quickly, which ended up working out well in a couple games. And then also the Dread Sphinx, which is the, what used to be the Necrosphinx or whatever. This is the flying guy. He was tragically unimpressive in the previous edition of the game, and I'm sad to report I don't find him that much better now. He was depressing throughout this entire tournament. So he's an interesting threat because he can fly. He is kind of scary to people. But I think he's scary only because they don't know what he can do. You read him on paper, he seems like pretty good, but in reality, he just often could not put out the heat. So let's talk about the games. So round 1, I was paired up against Sylvan Elves, but specifically the tree version of Sylvan Elves. So there was no elves in this list. It was all tree men and the ancients and the big, giant, super crazy tree man at the head of it all. And then the Thicket Beasts, I think as they're called, the new Treekin, and some units of Dryads. This was played by Phil from the Mid-Atlantic region. I don't remember your last name, Phil. I apologize. But you're super nice guy. Absolutely incredibly friendly, awesome dude, and a very, very smart player. And he rewarded me by pushing my teeth all the way down my throat. This was just a case of I didn't know the all-tree version of the army well enough to know what matchups I should be aiming at. And, I sort of basically, against my will, let Phil pick some of the matchups, or let myself be sort of pushed into matchups that weren't very favorable. And a lot of the tree version of the army is the tree version of the Sylvan Elves are just better versions of what I have. The Thicket Beasts are just much better versions of Shabti when they have the standard bearer in there and their strength and toughness 5 and all this. All in all, this was a pretty big loss. I think I managed to kill one of the tree men and some chaff, and that was about it. And I more or less got tabled. So I got about 7 points out of the first round. It was a rough start to the tournament. It was a fun game, though, and as I said, Phil was nice. And it was a good learning experience. And as always, rolling was give or take. Even Phil admitted at the end that he was rolling pretty fantastic on his otherworldly, which is sort of their ward save. But that being said, I certainly, there's no way I would blame the dice on this. My own bad play and misknowledge of the matchups is the reason that I was not hyper successful in this game, or let's say even competitive, because I don't think I was. Though it was fun. All right, next round. So round 2 was against Bretonnians, the Kingdom of Aquitaine. It's going to happen a lot. This is a matchup I was much more comfortable with. My army is primed and ready to crush these knights. I have a lot of high strength attacks. I have a massive amount of lethal strike. Like, every kitty cat has lethal strike guys riding on top. The Tomb Cataphracts are all lethal strike with their guys riding on the top. I have, I had access to a spell in this game. I did end up rolling it that gave me lethal strike, or enhanced my existing lethal strike. So the amount of just armor punching power that I've got, not to mention the Nutcracker unit, strength 6 will take a 2-up knight's armor down to, a pretty favorable position pretty fast. Not to mention the fact that the scariest part about about the Kingdom of Ecotane, about the knights, is their lance charges, right? These very potent, like, strength 6 lance charges. My kitty cats at toughness 8 really don't care about your lance charges at strength 6. So like a Knight of the Realm unit or whatever that has a super... He was running one of the Knight of the Realm units that has a super wide frontage and has the impact hits. Again, okay. Like a ton of strength 5 or whatever impact hits doesn't mean anything to us, to a T8 kitty cat. He's going to shake those off. And overall this one was a win for me. Wasn't a huge win, but it was a pretty decent win. I think I ended up with 16 or 17 points in this game, so it was okay. I ended up winning by a wide enough margin. Did by no means table the opponent or anything, but it was this. I felt more comfortable with this game. I know the Kingdom of Ecotane. I know kind of what they're more capable of and how they're going to move and how to better sort of direct the knights and neutralize them. And so I felt like I was able to bring a little more actual skill and tactics to this fight. And, did exactly basically what I just said. Like, made sure that cats engaged, lances of knights, even if I couldn't get them on the charge. Just march them up an inch away and just let them sit in front of the lance where it can't do anything but charge the cat. In the end, the charge bonus really doesn't mean that much to my cats, especially if I can just sort of be replacing 2 wounds a turn onto them through healing spells and the spell or tribute. So yeah, this was a very fun game. It was a very well played game. My opponent did have some bad luck, failing a couple key charges that I think were helpful, certainly. But overall, I think that it was a bad matchup for my opponent. Again, I have a huge amount of high toughness and a huge amount of high strength, and I can crack knight's armor pretty fast. So there you go. So, from a good matchup to a terrible matchup. So, my game 3 was against Sylvan Elves again. Only this time, it was the all Sylvan Elves portion of the Sylvan Elves. No trees, just all elves. And it was a pretty solid avoidance list. So, a couple units of the... I don't know what they're called now, but they used to be Sisters of the Thorn. Units of ambushing... units of ambushing Heath Riders, and then we had lots of the Hawk Riders, which I don't remember what they're called now. I apologize, but lots of the Hawk Riders, just a lot of things like that. All things that could get away from you, and very, very, very avoidance sort of wear you down list. My response to this was to drop my entire army right away during deployment and just say, go ahead. And I did that by castling in the corner with a cat pointing backwards against the wall. So, like, even if there was some weird way he could have gotten anything in at sort of 1 rank wide, which is the amount of space that I kind of left in my castle, there just wasn't going to be any space there. And my plan, this was an objective-taking game. You had to control objectives sort of on the center line. And my plan was more or less to sit in my castle and weather the storm until basically late in the game, and then just roll out in force and claim the 2 objectives and just sit on them. And again, just sit there and hope to survive. Because I was never going to catch anything in this army. I am way too slow. Everything in this army is basically going to march at will and run around 18 inches with free reform and everything. They're going to be out of my line of sight in 2 seconds. It's just like my units don't have very wide arc of sights because I don't have big hordes or anything like that. Like, Battle Sphinxes have very thin arcs of sight. It's very easy to walk into their flank. So I can't even establish a large amount of control on the battlefield. Like, even if I move out to the center and sort of form a ring, it's still hard for me to actually then control the battlefield, just because you can still find holes in there. Most notably about my opponent's army here is he had 3 changelings, or shapeshifters, or whatever they're called, who were all kitted to the nines, and were all absolute stone-cold murderers, most of which did multiple wounds against monsters and monstrous infantry. If you remember my list, you may have noticed that my list entirely consisted of monstrous infantry, monstrous cavalry, and monsters. So if one of those changelings even touched one of my units, it more or less exploded it before I got to act. I mean, again, everything in my army is like initiative nothing. So, those changelings would just walk up, hit on 2s, and, explode whatever they touched. I had one, as a point of example for this, I had a changeling sneak into a flank charge, because, again, it's a small 20mm base. It's hard to block. It's one guy on a 20mm base wandering around. It's hard to stop that guy when he can run around 18 inches. I had one of them get into the flank of my undamaged cataphract unit. So in one round, after Crumble, the cataphract unit went from, so this is a unit of snake surfers, 6 strong with the general, right? Go from undamaged to 1 wound left on the general. I'll let that sink in. So that means that I lost something like 17 wounds in that round. Yeah, that's right, because I would have lost everything. Like, I would have lost all 18, but the undead construct rule is the only thing. That bleeding by that 1 less is why I didn't explode. So, there you go. Needless to say, this actually ended at kind of a draw. It was pretty close. I think it ended up like 11-9 or something, which became like a 13-11 after battle points, because despite losing that, I did manage to catch a couple units, just with spells. Like, I just sat back and cast. I rolled into the Light of Death, sort of the equivalent of the what the casket used to do, forcing 3d6 leadership tests. And that's a really great spell against this army, because it's all spread out. Nobody's ever in leadership or standard bearer range. There's, no rerolls or anything like that. And I just kept forcing through these leadership tests, and on this multiple small unit thing where there's lots of little units clustered up in little attack packs, I was able to blow away a couple of those packs. Like, I took out all the Warhawk Riders, one through a lucky charge of chariots where they got stuck, where they didn't think they were going to. And so I caught a couple of them there, and then the rest all just through that Light of Death, repeatedly just blowing away these small units. So it ended up at a close to a draw, which honestly I was pretty happy with, because this was a terrible matchup. Most of it was me trying to avoid the changelings. I sat in my castle until the changelings got right up and were about to charge me, and then literally marched the whole army forward into the center of the table, and then desert winded to rearrange them all again, facing the opposite direction out of the arcosight of the changelings. It was just like, as soon as those madmen got near us, it was just like, everybody, let's get out of here, run! They're gonna kill us all! Yeah, they did a lot. They killed a lot of us. Okay. So that was round 3. Very, very challenging game. That's what I'll say about that one. Avoidance Wood Elves have always been a challenging thing to play. This was Kent, by the way, who's from Canada, and was, by the way, I didn't mention this already, but Kent was a super nice guy, and did make, like, this army is not by default a fun army to play. It's not fun to play against an avoidance list. Kent made it really fun. Was a very happy guy, very fun to play, laid back, just very cool time. And we kept talking after every round after this of like, oh, how'd you do, blah, blah, blah. So, just a really great guy, and it was great to talk to him, and it was great to have him beat me. So I was happy for that. All right. Round 4, the next day, was against the Warriors of the Dark Gods. This was an interesting list. It was a very warrior-heavy list, which I always like to see. This was one of the Windy City Warriors playing me. And they had 2 big units of warriors, actual foot warriors. One marked Wrath, one marked Pestilence. Then there was a big unit of knights with the Lord embedded in that was also marked Wrath. And then there was, Hell Cannon and a whole lot of chaff. I wasn't too worried about that. Like, this is honestly a pretty good matchup for me as well. Anybody who relies a lot on infantry is a pretty good matchup for me because everything in my army stomps and thunder stomps, so I can really make up a lot of, I can make up a lot of distance there. This was a very back and forth game full of lots of wonky rolls and fun, failed charges that turned into good charges and stuff like that. It was a crazy game. It really went some unexpected directions. In the end, it was a victory for me. I did manage to basically break and kill the units of the Wrath Warriors. Picked up all the chaff, killed the Wrath Warriors, killed one of the characters, and hilariously, this is like the fight where my Dread Sphinx just failed me repeatedly. The Dread Sphinx never did anything much in those previous 3 games, just to point that out. Even when I got him into, like, he's multi-wound against monsters and ridden monsters, so I was always trying to use him to monster hunt, but even when he got into monsters, the Dread Sphinx has 5 attacks at initiative 2. They're strength 6, and they're like weapon skill 5, which is great, but I mean, it usually means, against enemy monsters, it usually means 4s and 4s, or at best 4s and 3s, right? So, if you look at that, you got 5 attacks. You're going to hit with 2 or 3 of them on average, right? You're going to wound with 1 or 2 of them, and then it's going to multi-wound. So it might become 2, or at best case 4 wounds. It's just not a lot of heat for a monster like that. Yeah, he's got lethal strike. Yeah, he's got poison, but the poison, it's just, it gets in the way, frankly, of things. And it's not that incredible. Yeah, and that's, all before armor saves that happen, assuming you don't get a lethal strike. Strength 6 does a pretty good job of cutting through armor, but especially on monsters who don't tend to be walking around with, like, 1-up saves. But still, the point is when you put this guy into the normal troops, say that have, like, like a 1-up saving throw, like, I don't know, Chaos Knights. Yeah, you're going to wound on 2s, but you're still hitting on 4s. And, they're still going to have a coin flip save. So it's very easy, and you don't get any multi-wounds out of that. Case in point, in this game, I managed to get a rear charge on his unit of Chaos Knights with that Dread Sphinx, and the end result of that was I killed 1, maybe 2 knights, maybe. And I won, and they broke on, like, a miracle roll because they were out of BSB range, so he didn't have the reroll. And I failed to catch them. And then I managed to catch them again with the Dread Sphinx and the Tomb Cataphracts in their flank, and managed to kill, with all of that, I managed to kill 1 knight. And beat them, and then when I proceeded to chase, in that fight, my Dread Sphinx died somewhere along the way. But I ended up beating them because of, like, the flank charge and all this. I beat them on numbers, and just res. And my pursuit roll, the last roll of the game, to catch those Chaos Knights, which certainly would have swung it into a much larger victory for me, because I would have got the points for the whole unit of Chaos Knights. The Chaos Lord, I mean, who was himself an outsized amount of points, as Chaos Lords always are. They ran, let's say, I don't know, I'm going to say off the top of my head, like 7 or 8 inches. And I was like, all right, I got a swift stride to catch him. Rolled 3 1s. And that was the last roll of the game, like at the bottom of round 6 or whatever, So, that was pretty hilarious. Nothing like a Yahtzee roll of 1s on a pursuit roll as the last roll of the game. So I didn't get those points, but it still was a victory. Again, not a huge one. I think, as I said, I ended up getting 16 out of this one as well. So, again, not too bad. I was happy with it. It went more or less how I would have expected it to go. It's hard to ever, like, table or just, literally pound into the dirt the Warriors, the Dark Gods. They've got a lot of elite, very tough units. And, I knew looking at the beginning, I was like, that unit of Pestilence Warriors is a nut I'm probably not going to crack. And I didn't. I just ended up kind of holding them up for the whole game. All right, round 5. You may have noticed this picture occurred before, And you're right. That's because round 5, I got paired against the Sylvan Elves again. So yes, for those of you keeping track, I fought Sylvan Elves 3 times out of 5 games in this tournament. And this was once again the tree army. There was a few elves who snuck into this list. There was like a small unit of the scouty guys in the woods, and then like 2 units of the regular archers. And this was a messenger-based game. So the little wood elves who just like on foot who stand around are like the least scary thing to me because I'm just going to shoot them on 5s. Like I don't have a huge amount of archers in here, but I've got enough that if I turn all the bows onto one unit, I'll do damage to it. And you know, little footy wood elves rely on being in like skirmishers and hardcover and blah 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 to be hit on like 32s. But you know, ass bows don't care; they just hit on 5s. So. It's a scary thing to an unarmored wood elf. Tomb King bows have always been classically like the great enemy to a Sylvan elf. But the tree component of the army was almost identical to earlier. So the 3 tree warriors, so like the spellcaster, the rare monster, and then the big Papa Lord, who's just a beast. And then the unit of Thicket beasts with the BSB installed and the big unit of dryads. Having played this round 1, over the day I had thought a lot about what I did wrong, and now I knew this army a lot better. So my move here, this had an unusual deployment. It had the deployment out of the book that's like 9 inches in the middle and 15 inches on the sides. So you can go out to 15 inches on sort of 18-inch areas on the side of the board. It's in the 9th Age sort of base scenario, base scenarios. I don't remember what the name of it is, but it's there. And so I set up on the 15-inch line. Like I just, again, dropped my whole army. I deployed 1 unit, he deployed 1 unit, I dropped my whole army into the 15-inch, like, castle rampart. Leaving like 1 unit that was fairly fast back on the 9-inch line that wouldn't fit. And I did that hoping he would deploy sort of in response to me on that 15-inch line, which he did. And that means that 30 inches of the board, we're now a foot closer, we're now 6 inches closer, not a foot, we're now 6 inches closer, right? Because we've closed off 3 additional inches from each side. And that 6 inches is a big, big deal. Because my whole army moves 6. Minimum, right? Most move 7. So my plan was pretty simple. I knew I had first turn since I had dropped everything and had a huge bonus to the roll. So I took first turn, marched all the way up with my whole army, max marched, 12 inches, 14 inches, and then powered through like a 5 dice desert wind, moved my move up again, and marched every matchup I wanted up to 1 inch away from his army. So I moved the entire Tomb King's army went from Undying Dynasty's army went from my side of the board to an inch away from his units, with the exact matchups I wanted at the bottom of my turn in round 1. Meaning that really the only option that he had was to charge and complete those, or back up and just let me, back up and then get into other, hinky situations where I could then start crisscrossing and maybe even flank charging here or there. So that meant that what this game became was an attrition war, where I had the matchups this time that I knew I wanted. And I had, sort of reinforcements in place where I knew I would need them. So it just turned into a grind fest. It took about 5 turns, but over that 5 turns, and just my general and my caster sitting behind, giving out regeneration where it was necessary, casting spells to heal wounds, and, placing appropriate buffs, I eventually ground down every tree unit. It was a long slog. This is at the top of 6, I think we had our last couple fights, and that was to remove the last of his units. So it was 12 solid combat rounds of the same fights over and over and over again. Okay, just a grinding fight. And just, the Tomb King slowly winning that grind. because in the end I could regenerate some of my wounds, and I knew, because I had picked the matchups, I knew in the end, over the long term, I would win it out. And then once just a few units crumbled, then that meant that since the fight was happening in this very tiny area of the board, everybody was immediately in sort of flank charge space. So that ended up being my biggest win. It was 23 points, I think, is what I got out of that. Again, I felt not great for my opponent. He did have some bad rolling in that game. Certainly, his dice could have done a lot better for him. No doubt about that. But in the end, I was happy with how I played during this one. And I think if I did good, it was only because of the very harsh lessons I learned from Phil in round one and then applied in this game. So it's interesting. You don't normally get to apply lessons you learn in a tournament so very fast. But seeing basically the same list again, I felt like I had a slight edge up because I was pretty sure no one else there was rocking my list. Surprisingly, no one else decided to go for the all weird constructs led by a tomb architect army. Whatever. I like being weird. So that was my round 5. Again, it was a very fun game. Although, it was a very grinding game. It was sort of the inevitability of death. So final results. So out of a potential 125 points, I guess, is what the maximum is. Yeah, that sounds right. 125 points. If you got 25 each round, if you were just the stellarest of stellar players. I got 67. It's fine. It put me somewhere in the middle, I think. So I was okay with that. I was totally average, which I felt was pretty good, because as I said, this was my first, 9th age tournament, and I was using a very wonky, unusual list of an army that, Undying Dynasties is better than it was, and certainly things are more balanced, but that army still has a lot of challenges. I managed to keep my Hierophant from crumbling in most games, but, it doesn't take much, and I don't really feel like I hate investing tons of points into protecting that stupid Hierophant. So it's an army with a lot of unique challenges. It has neat abilities, and I love it. I still love it. I like it in all of its incarnations. Just no matter how sucky it is, it just has a very unique aesthetic and a feel to playing it that I just love. So overall, I was very happy. I felt that the best part here was that I had 5 really fun, good opponents. I didn't play anybody that was rude or slow playing or doing anything. Nor did I hear about anybody really doing that, as a matter of fact. Everybody seemed really happy, really positive. It was great to hang out with everybody, to have 2 solid days of gaming. Buckeye Battles, run by... So Jeff runs Buckeye Battles, and you can look up the Facebook group for Buckeye Battles. I'll try to grab it and throw it into the description of this video. It's a really amazing tournament, and if you can get here to Ohio, it's been run every year, and as Jeff said, it's the players showing up to this tournament that makes 9th Age be alive and thrive, and I would just highly encourage you, if you could make the trip, to come up to Buckeye. It's so much fun. Everybody here is so positive, so great. It was an absolutely electric atmosphere of people supercharged about this game, about their armies, and just about getting together and having a good time. So overall, I want to thank Jeff for running an amazing tournament. And thanks to all my opponents for 5 great games. There you go. That's the little Buckeye Battles after action report. You won't see a lot of these because I only do 2 or 3 tournaments a year. But hey, there you go. There's one. Hope you enjoyed, and we'll see you next time.